we will be going to our next panel session. Topic discussed will be digital infrastructures, foundations for a sustainable, future-ready Singapore. I would like to invite Ian Rumsby, the panel moderator, on stage. So Ian Rumsby is Chief Client Officer at APCO and is based in Sydney and specializes in corporate communications advisory. Prior to joining APCO, Ian served as managing partner at Stonehaven, a strategy and communications consultancy. Ian is a highly regarded executive coach and mentor, skilled in the development and articulation of brand narratives that underpin employee experience and market engagement initiatives. He was a long-standing board member at Cure Cancer, an Australian charity providing seed funding for research scientists across all areas of cancer. Ian is a recipient of the PR Week Asia Pacific PR Leader of the Year Award. He was formerly an officer in the Royal Navy, where he trained as a navigator and pilot in the Philippines. Ian, please welcome on stage and to introduce your panel members as well.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us here today. It's a privilege to be here. I'm here in my capacity as the Secretariat of the Asia Pacific Data Center Association. I just want to make a few remarks before I introduce you to the panel. According to Forbes, in a recent report, more than 90% of all data created in the entirety of human history has been created in the last 2 years. And in the last 10 years, we've seen a 50-fold increase in data use. These are startling statistics. We've heard some from the Minister already this morning, and they all highlight the speed of extraordinary change that is happening around us as economies and societies are digitalized and AI technologies become ubiquitous. Supporting and sustaining this fundamental shift in how business and communities connect and operate is a digital infrastructure that has its foundations in the development and operation of data centers. So, as we look at how we're going to develop a secure data center ecosystem that can support societies' insatiable appetite for an increased dependency on digital connectivity, we've obviously got to ensure that our approach fulfills a green economy agenda in which reduced energy consumption is prioritized. Joining me today to address this somewhat vexed issue are 4 esteemed panelists who live and breathe the challenge of building, operating, and contributing to the development of a sustainable data center environment that meets current and future needs. Serene Na is Vice Chair of the APAC, the Asia Pacific Data Center Association. She's Managing Director and Head of Asia Pacific at Digital Realty, a leading data center operator. Previously, Serene was Executive Director and Chief Financial Officer at Carey Properties and Head of Portfolio Management in Asia for Silver Lake Partners. She honed her skills in finance, M&A, and business transformation at General Electric, where she was CFO of GE Capital Greater China. Welcome to you, Serene. Asha Ling, just towards the end there in the grey suit. Asha is Chief Tech Officer and Managing Director of Singapore for PDG, Princeton Digital Group, where he's been responsible for shaping the company's digital and technology strategy globally, as well as leading regional investments, growth, and business operations in PDG in Singapore, Johor, and Batam as well. And previously, Asha held senior roles at KPMG and IMDA. Welcome to you, Asha. Patrick Chan. Patrick, at the end there, is Vice President of Uptime Institute South Asia, where he is responsible for all commercial and service delivery activities in the region. The Uptime Institute is a globally recognized digital infrastructure authority known for the creation and management of the world's most adopted standards for data center performance and resilience. Likewise to you, Patrick, welcome. And last but definitely not least is Ken Seah. Ken is Head of Public Affairs for Google Data Centers in Asia. He's based in Singapore and he leads the data centers political, economic and community engagement across its existing portfolio and new investments in the APAC region. Ken was previously Deputy DG at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Singapore. He's also served as head of the political section in the Permanent Mission of Singapore in the United Nations in New York, and he was deputy head of mission in the Singapore Embassy in Doha. So please join me in welcoming our panelists today. Thank you. Thank you again. Serene, I think I might just start with you, if I may. I highlighted earlier that data center sector continues to outpace the growth of many industry sectors. Tell us a little bit about what's fueling the growth of that sector and what are the primary issues that you believe might prohibit the industry's ability to meet this increased demand?
Sure. Thank you for having me. Good morning, everyone. I think there's a couple of different form factors that's driving the growth of data centers. First of all of you with your cell phones is the #1 driver of data being generated, data being transacted, data being transferred for data centers. You may not realize it, but you're actually a recipient or a user of data, which then essentially is being processed or stored at the data center, or even in the cloud, which also essentially resides within or pass through a data center. Coupled with that, I think the different form factors that's happening is certainly the increase in compute for both consumers, but also for enterprises. I think many of the earlier panelists talked about the growth in enterprises and how that really works within the realm of technology and how fast that is changing. And then the next form factor that I think many of you are deeply familiar being in as part of this exhibition is AI. And AI takes many different forms. We're still at the early innings of artificial intelligence. We're just seeing the early stages of what we call large language modeling. And that takes on a different form and use case and workloads of data centers because it requires large amount of data to be trained continuously. But at the same time, once it's trained, the algorithms needs to be applied to the actual use cases, which is what many of us have referred to as inference or education. And that is a different form factor of data being inferred, if you will, as part of artificial intelligence. And I would also say that as a company from Digital Realty perspective, because we're one of the largest operators in the world, we're able to see that inference is just at a very early stage. A lot of the companies that have the ability to spend the money to do inference are at the top level of spending money on AI. When you then superimpose that to many of the G2000 enterprises, whether it's in Singapore or anywhere else in the world, that hasn't really trickled down yet. But just imagine, as every single one company now starts to use data for training and data for inference, the use of data will definitely, I won't even put a form factor of how many times it will be, but you will be certain that that will grow exponentially, if you will. Now, coupled with some of the challenges that comes along with that, there's no doubt that as data center grows, what fuels a data center? It's power. And in many cases now with power density running really, really hot, it's water. As some of you may have heard, liquid cool directed chip. Everywhere we look right now, many major economies, Singapore included, we have to find that balancing act between how much power or electricity we're able to use to power data centers to enable all of those applications, and at the same time ensuring that we're not adding to that carbon problem that we have. On top of that, we need to look at many emerging economies in terms of water or other refrigerant, other coolants that's available. And all of this is a very intricate sustainability focus. And again, many of our customers as an operator are very, very focused about sustainable solutions. Hence, we're looking at net zero solutions. We're even using AI to monitor our power consumptions. We're even looking at, hey, there's some maybe less efficient old data centers that we may be better off retrofitting to make it more efficient for the load that's currently happening.
That's great. We will dig into some of those points perhaps in a little bit more detail in a moment. Ken, I'll just turn to you maybe. Serene's talked a lot about energy consumption and how we manage that. Tell me a bit from your perspective, when you look at the data center ecosystem, how is it responding to the rapidly changing expectations of customers, regulators, more broadly wider society as well?
Firstly, it's very important to acknowledge that sustainability is no longer just a business priority, it is a business prerogative, especially in the data center industry. Sustainable data centers means data centers that consume less power. Less power means less bills. So there's both a commercial and environmental aspect to this. But getting back to your question, I see the data center industry coming up with two ways on how to deal with this issue of energy consumption. The first is deciding what type of energy they're going to consume. So here you see many major data center operators committing to carbon-free energy targets, committing to net zero across the supply chain. And the second way, which I feel as if is very important, especially in countries like Singapore, which are alternative energy disadvantaged and which may not have so much reliable access to carbon-free energy at this early stage, is really about energy efficiency. For us, the most sustainable energy is the energy that is not consumed to begin with. So the data center industry, we are thinking about how we redesign, how we build, how we architect data centers that are appropriate and sustainable for the AI era, especially that we're finding ourselves in now.
Fantastic, thank you. Asha, I'm interested maybe in your perspective as well. Obviously, from PDG, you may have a slightly different view or a different approach. Just talk to us a little bit about the way in which you're addressing this sort of broader issue of how you're responding to consumer regulator sentiment around energy.
I think it's a very good morning. I think the first thing we wanted to really set the stage is that for folks like us, Sarimi and Ken and Patrick, when we say infrastructure, we mean land, building, power, and I also want to add to a very large extent water. I know in the audience there may be a lot of crowd with IT specialists here. When you think infrastructure, you think all that whole layer of stack up to the cloud level, and I think the earlier panel was great because they say everything goes to the cloud, right? But remember, folks, the cloud needs a house to stay, right? And we buy large swaths of land, we build buildings, and we operate so that the clouds can stay inside there. So to that note, if I could add a little point, purely just from the cloud growth that we're seeing, prior to the AI kind of Gen AI kind of thing that took over us, we're looking at, mid-teens, in this part of the world of CAGR growth, compound annual growth rate. And then when AI took over, we say exponential growth. Right? Sometimes I even question, is there a higher rate of growth than exponential? Because from what we're seeing, we're at the frontiers of building that physical infrastructure to support this pivotal change in what I call the next stage of evolution of human species, where we're at the cusp of it. It is really scary. Now, the constraint that we face is physical resources. Some very brilliant person ever said the two next thing that constrains us human beings is, I think, intelligence, in that case, AI, and energy. And obviously, ideally, we would hope for it to be green energy. If I could throw in a third thing, is water. Folks, we do a lot of analysis on energy optimization, efficiency, even generation of new energy for slightly more disadvantaged location and markets that we are also very much in. The need to really appreciate how can we solve that problem requires the entire village to come together, which is an answer to the question you asked. Sorry, it's a long answer. And the village is us, is you, everybody here. And there's a village chief, which is our esteemed government in each of the countries, where they pull us together and say, hey, it is an existential human being species challenge. We need to come together to solve this together as a village, as a global village, as a regional village, as a local country village. And I strongly believe data centers industry has a huge role to play, but openness in communication, very open conversations on what can we do, the low-hanging fruits. And I'm happy to unpack a little bit on that later if there's time. Yeah. And also what are aspirational. Because aspirational is like what we do in Singapore. We have the Singapore Green Plan 2030. By 2050, Singapore wants to be net carbon neutral. For those of you guys who have unpacked into it, it's not easy. It's really not easy. We are in Singapore really disadvantaged. But I am confident in the Singapore government that we're able to drive towards that.
So I want to build on this a little bit because it's a really interesting area. Perhaps before we get sort of stuck into the village collaboration conversation. The question that all of this begs as we fall across this tipping point that we're talking about, this unseen or unknown future, is how capable we are to actually build the infrastructure that we need. Is it a case of capability, or is it a case of constraints that we have to consider? Undoubtedly, the answer, I guess, is both. But how able are we to deliver on what we think we need in the future? Just pick up again on that, Asher. I might turn to you on this, Serena.
Today, presently in 2024, based on what I see, I've made this comment in some more private platforms before, but I would love to hear what my colleagues also think. But I feel that we, as a human species, have not yet had the experience of building at this scale and speed ever before in our history. When an industrial revolution happens, let's say in the late, I don't know, in 1800s or something, that pivotal change transforms the entire ecosystem, all the way from politics, from societal, and it's brought about by a technology advancement. I think what we're experiencing in the next 3, 5, 10 years will be something of that magnitude. What it is, I can't tell, but to answer the questions, we are now probably at the physical limitation of how fast and quick we can build physical infrastructure to support this growth.
Right, which picks up on Serene's point about the way in which we're beginning to deploy AI to actually build the infrastructure that we need, right? This becomes an increasingly considered point. I thought you might have the answer that we're all, the world is waiting for, but obviously not on this occasion. But thank you. Patrick, let's just pick up again then on this village collaboration piece, because it's obviously key. Can you just talk to us a little bit about, the actors in public and private sectors, how the relationship between them is changing, where we're seeing positive, effective examples of collaboration develop?
Thanks, Ian. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for having me in this panel. There is basically a very strong collaboration between public and private, but there are countries where there's still room for improvement. Let me give you an example of a very good example of public and private. And just because I'm Singapore here, I'm not going to say good things for Singapore. I'll tell you a fact. Singapore basically have come up with a very good initiative about sustainability. And I know in terms of sustainability, there is basically a strategic vision of having Jurong Island in 2050 to be a hydrogen hub, to be supplying that energy. And that is a very good green initiative. And it's not talking about green, using, I believe, a 9 megawatt electrolyzer to turn it into a hydrogen hub. And not just Singapore, Hanoi or Vietnam has also come up with this initiative by 2050 to be a hydrogen supplier for the country. So we are talking about sustainability. Sustainability is a very big word. It's a very, it's a vast word. And what are we talking about sustainability? And we are talking about PUE. Are we also talking about WUE? I'm sorry giving you all these alphabets. Not that I've just taken alphabet soup, but again, the PUE itself is not basically the solution to sustainability. It's not, but basically when you look at sustainability, do not forget about resiliency, the availability. And when you talk about availability, here again, earlier on, you have the senior minister talk about cybersecurity. And this is another area. You may have sustainability, you may have great PUE, but you may have a lousy security, safety. In the Uptime Institute, we actually look at the IT outages, and 16% of all the outages are basically from cybersecurity. And the cost of cybersecurity are malware, ransomware. And those are really, really expensive penalty to be caught in. And the value of that was, I believe, for 5% of those who actually caught in that had to pay more than $1 million USD. The other part of it is the adoption or the demand for AI. I'm not going to be bored with all this, and because we keep talking about AI, but you need to understand when you go into AI, the whole mechanics changes, the whole paradigm shift changes. We are not talking about having a co-location or normal data center to adopt AI. It's a whole different animal. the flow loading itself is not a 15 Pascal square per Pascal. It's 25 Pascal. Means you need a very heavy loading. You need about cooling. And here we talk about liquid cooling. We talk about DLCs and all that sort of things. The question is that could this be an overhype? Because liquid cooling is required if you have anything above 70 kilowatt and above. So just because you're having a 20 kilowatt, you want to go into liquid cooling. That's not really the wise choice. And of course, security is something that the public and the private has to meet. And of course, don't forget resiliency. Don't save the toe and you cut off the leg. That's my advice. And that's always the ending part. I always say, with greater power comes greater responsibility. And you know who say that. And that responsibility is your resiliency. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Patrick. Ken, can we just pick up on from your perspective on this when we're talking about the collaboration journey, particularly from a Google perspective and with your sort of global hat on, so to speak, we talk about cross-industry, cross-sector ecosystem development when it comes to finding solutions. Talk to us a little bit about cross-market collaboration, if you would. You know, what you're seeing that's being done perhaps in Europe or elsewhere.
Sure, yeah, just picking up on this point. Well, firstly, data center operators themselves need to be invested in becoming more efficient. It cannot be a situation where they're just doing it the old way, put a hardware in a hall and turn on the switch. For AI data centers, your server hall will burn down. But so firstly, becoming better themselves and then sharing that information with the rest of industry. In Finland, Google, along with other hyperscale data center operators, some of our technology provider partners like Danfoss and Schneider have created a research hub known as the Net Zero Innovation Hub, which attempts to bring down carbon emissions of data centers. The very first realizable project was just announced last month, a project on how we reuse heat from data centers to do district heating in Finland. Obviously, this works in Finland, right? Because it's a cold country. It's not going to work in Singapore, but there are solutions for the Singapore context that I think would be incumbent on us as an industry, as government, as academia to think through and explore what makes sense for net zero data centers in a tropical environment.
That's fascinating. There's a whole conversation we can have about data center build in Scandinavia, but let's not go there right now. Serene, can I just turn to you really about sort of what else needs to be done? You know, what do we need to see from those within this digital infrastructure ecosystem to promote sustainable practices? Obviously, it's key. We've talked a lot about water. We've talked a lot about energy and how we regulate it. Just interested in your views as to what more needs to be done.
I think there's maybe two aspects to consider. I think one is just thinking about the word infrastructure and how wide that goes. Something that each of the members of the Asia Pacific Data Center Alliances have also been articulating, and more so recently, even my role as digital royalty we've been advocating is the importance of recognizing that we not only serve the large hyperscalers, cloud service providers, but we also serve enterprises. We also serve the connectivity partners. We also serve the vendors that provide services to all of the above. So it's an entire ecosystem and economy that we got to think about from the wing-to-wing chain of the infrastructure. So we talk a lot about the upstream, which is the land, the building, the power, the water, but just think about the usage and the way data is transacted. Think about the cooling vendors, think about the connectivity vendors, think about how content is being shared. And as we have to think about each of those loops, we as an association have the ability through the many members that we have to represent a point of view on sustainable practices. We have a point of view to be able to share the benefits of this infrastructure. We're not always bad. given that we do emit carbon, but is there a better way to emit carbon? Or maybe there's a way to reduce carbon while actually bring higher value data workloads to everyone. I think that a lot of that is being done through association, be it SG Tech or Asia Pacific Data Center Alliances. We're fairly new, but we aim to be able to do that to represent the entire wing of the industry. The second piece that I'd just like to add is I think the importance of net zero solutions, and I think Ken talked a lot about that, but it's also important to push innovation, to continue to innovate. And I think companies that have the ability to put aside money for research and development or partners with our customers to do so is super important, because we are just at the early stage of a lot of these new technology shifts. If we're not consistently sitting there with our partners, with our customers, with the government, thinking about what are the incremental steps we can do, or what are some of the innovations we can do, we're missing the point. So for example, in Singapore, in the tropical data center environment, we've been experimenting at Digital Realty about reusing water. And based on some of the results, we've been able to share that as the tropical data center framework. And again, we don't stop there. We look at different ways of water, different refrigerants that we can use. We rolled out an AI systems that we use in the mirror that we now rolled it out in Asia Pacific to monitor our data consumption and then say, what are some of the things that we can do to turn it into green energy? And also what are some of the areas where we can actually power down on non-essential power? So just very incremental steps, but there's a lot more we can do when we all collectively work together and continue to share best practices in moving this along. And I'm sure if in 2 years' time, or 3 years' time, when we all sit together, we'll be talking about different innovations based on the workloads that's to come.
Fantastic. Just one more question before we wrap up, and I'm sort of interested from all of you. Obviously, there's a public perception agenda that needs to be addressed here as far as data centers are concerned, and the role of the sector in being able to support the environmental, economic, and social challenges that we face. Maybe Ken, from your side, what do you think is the one thing really that the sector needs to be doing to help reshape that opinion?
I think we need to dream big, but we need to start small. So what is realizable today? And I think what is very achievable is just greater transparency, so that there is comparable data across data center operators on how efficient we are being. So Google, we publish our power usage effectiveness by the site level at every campus around the world, every quarter of the year. And I think just having that comparable base of data across data center operators would be a very good starting point for us to think through, well, how do you get to that PUE? What are the things that you are doing to achieve that? And then from there, we can build something which means the entire ecosystem improves.
Fabulous. Asher, from your side.
Whenever I hear that, someone accuses our data center industry as being a very carbon heavy one, I tend to always want to say this, and I think early on, both Serene and Ken has very nicely set it up. I think Serene was saying, right, why is there such a big growth? You are the ones that are enabling the growth. It is you and your family members who wakes up in the morning, takes up your phone and does something. Your kids who plays, if you want to save carbon footprint, take away the phone from your kids. Try doing that, right? And see what happens, right? And, but the point is, today, we have not measured what is a individual person's carbon footprint. We may measure it on an indirect basis. Oh, what is your car mileage? How many flights you do? But have you ever taken a look at what the direct amount of compute that individual uses that is actually aggregated in data centers that Serena and I will be building and operating for folks like, Ken here, who, when you type in a search on Google, what do you think happens? What do you think happens? You don't think about the carbon footprint that goes into it because the finger is pointed at us. But we are all responsible. That's why I say this becomes a species level conversation. Yeah. And the village has to come together. And that's why having APDCA, SG Tech, even other industry associations that we're working very closely with, like Infrastructure Masons, OCP, we're all coming together now as an entire global village in the industry to say, what can we do together? Let's put aside competition. There are many ecosystem players along the way. There are OEMs, vendors, technology providers, innovation companies, and there are also clients. We have to address it together with the guidance of our village chief, the regulators, who give us a clear path forward on how do we get towards a sustainable future.
Got it. Thank you. Patrick, just very quickly, same question to you. Public perception. How do we deal with it?
Okay.
Two sentences.
Yesterday I had a discussion with a academician, okay? And there's one word we talk about sustainability. And I say, how do you know your data center is sustainably? Just because you have one, it doesn't mean you can say to your heart it's sustainable. There's always a word that I always say is what you cannot measure, you cannot manage. And that's sustainability. The first step is to do a gap analysis of how sustainable you are in your own operations, whether in the work or in a data center or in the building. And that's the first measurement to start with. And I would be very guilty if I don't mention about your resources, because how many of those resources that we have have gone for training on sustainability? And this is the other part of it. Education sustainability begins with education. Thank you.
Thanks, Patrick. Serene, last thoughts from you.
Yeah, maybe just a quick two thoughts. I think one is just for everyone and also for the constituents and for the government to realize that the word infrastructure, digital infrastructure is synonymous now with physical infrastructure. It's the same as the way you think about your utility companies, your banking infrastructure, and your bridges and your transportations. Today, the usage of data has led to digital infrastructure being equally as important as your cell towers, and therefore the ones processing your data. And therefore, we need to now look at the lens of that, because digital infrastructure is going to enable the growth of a company, of a country, of a group of people. And therefore, we need to look at it from a different lens. It's no longer optional. It's actually basic infrastructure and a necessity. Point number one. Point number two is, I think, the importance of the title here for Sustainable Future Ready Singapore. It's not a Singapore-only problem. Many economies are facing the same problem. And in fact, many economies have a different problem pertaining to power. They have a transmission problem. Singapore does not have a transmission problem. Singapore has a more of how do we find green, renewable energy to enable that growth, coupled with data sovereignty. We haven't even touched on data sovereignty, which is a lot of countries now want data stay within their borders. And so together as a village, we got to work with our regulators, our customers, our vendors to figure that out in terms of each country's need and plan for that. Because what you realize, data centers don't get built tomorrow. Data center takes time to build and takes time to come into play, which then means we got to start now in order to plan for the next 24, 36 months. And we're going to be playing a catch-up game. So this is something that I think we're all very focused on.
Thank you to you all. It's been a fascinating conversation. I hope you've enjoyed it. Really, the challenge here is one. This is a critical moment for all of us. This concept of the village, of collaborating across markets, across industries, sharing where possible. It's all part of the mechanism in which we can at least provide some of the resolutions towards us. So will you please join me in thanking our esteemed panelists today. Thank you.
Thank you, Ian, and to the panel members.